Welcome to the Maine Coastal Islands Visitor Center. We're all about terns and razorbills and puffins, and today I'm really excited because I am an Arctic tern that has flown in to hear this brand new children's book that Amy has written, and so she's going to read for you and show you the pictures of this new book called The Longest Journey, The Arctic Tern's Migration. That's my migration, and I'm trying to eat as much as I can because I'm going to have a very, very, very long flight to do pretty soon. So take it away, Amy.
Great. I love it. I love the costume. So yeah, so I'm excited to be here in this hotel room because I have COVID. Unfortunately, I'm not there in person, but I'm excited to be able to share this, read this with you today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my process of making the book. And then if you have any questions at the end, I'd love to answer those. And this is really special for me to be here to share this with you all because I actually worked with Linda Welch, who is, she's actually based out of Rockland as well. And she is a wildlife scientist that is an expert on Arctic terns. So I actually reached out to her when I was working on this book for her to review my work. And she invited me out to Metinick Island off the coast of Maine to the Arctic tern colony that she studies. And so I got to spend a day in Maine with Arctic terns. So it's really fun to be able to share now the finished story because all that went into it. So first I was going to talk a little bit about picture book, the way that they're made. So the outside here is the jacket. And with this story, it is about a journey across the planet. And so there's a lot of illustrated maps in it. And so on the jacket cover, we wanted to show the whole journey that she takes from North Pole to South Pole. And I actually used Google Earth to help illustrate this. So I collaged together 4 different views from Google Earth. So this is an accurate map projection. It's just not something that we're used to seeing with the poles on the sides and Africa on the side. But then also when you go to, this is the case wrap. So the paper that's glued to the exterior of the picture book. It's called a case wrap. And so this one, I don't know how well you can see it. You can look at your copy there, but this is more a traditional map of the world that we see. And again, showing her entire journey over the course of the year. So with that, I will jump in and I'm going to start reading. As we go, you can see there's more little maps. These little worlds here show where she is during her journey. I'm going to reposition myself here. Where am I going? Okay. Can you see this? All right. Flapping and fluttering, the little Arctic tern takes off. Oops. I'm so terrible at turning pages. Okay. Off on her epic migration, a daring journey chasing sun and food from North Pole to South Pole across 4 oceans and 3 continents and back in a year, 60,000 miles, the longest migration of any living creature on Earth. The longest journey. Her story began when our little bird hatched on the Greenland tundra in summer, a time when the sun never sets. Her first days were spent in a noisy colony of thousands, growing up fast, prepared for her first voyage, only 2 months away, cared for by her parents, surviving flooding rains and Arctic predators, often with a hungry belly. Kip, 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 she calls, embarking on her journey to the other end of the planet. Our young traveler now ventures south, one of a flock of 20, climbing up, 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 gliding on currents of wind, soaring faster and faster. Soaring farther too, as stars guide the way ahead. She flaps hard to keep up. Kriya, kriya, her father calls, leading the flock to a bustling feeding area out at sea. Where they stay for a month to fill their bellies for the long trek ahead, catching cold water krill and fish that are schooling deeper in the ever-changing, ever-warming North Atlantic Ocean. She hovers, then plunge dives underwater, missing again and again, starving, straining, until at last she catches a bite. Gulp. After weeks of honing her fishing skills, she departs, floating up, up, up through the clouds, studying landmarks that dot the world below. Resting on Tenerife in the Canary Islands for the night, discovering its crowded sandy shores, then navigating south along the desert cliffs of Northwest Africa, past Morocco and Mauritania, swooping near wave tops, snatching up mackerel in flight. Then suddenly, Pia, Pia, a scavenging pirate, a great skua lunges toward her, trying to make her drop her food. Her protective father dive bombs down. Kek, 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 kier, kier, he shrieks, fending off the attack. Shaken, the little Arctic tern carries on, staring eastward along the jungles of Liberia, spying a flamboyance of flamingos for the first time. Kahonk, kahonk, they trumpet. Pressing on past the equator, she meets a pod of humpback whales that churn up a sand eel feast. She's careful not to be swallowed up too. Days pass by, now 15,000 miles from home. She flails against headwinds near the dunes of Namibia, then rests on driftwood near the rocky Cape of Good Hope. She battles to keep ahead of an angry storm over the ever-warming South Atlantic Ocean. Forced off course by strong westerly winds, pushed east over the swirling southern Indian Ocean, exhausted, the little Arctic tern struggles to keep up with her flock, while below, tuck, 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 trill, tuck, 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 a raft of macaroni penguins leads them to refuge on the archipelago of the Crozet Islands. She gobbles up Antarctic krill, regains her strength. Then presses even farther south and westward over the polar Southern Ocean, along the ice shelf of Antarctica, until at last she arrives at the Weddell Sea, her final stop after 30,000 miles of flying. She rests on pack ice, recuperating and molting in the Antarctic summer, also a place and time where the sun never sets. And when days grow shorter and colder, she takes off again with a new flock of 20. Traveling on prevailing global winds, racing 300 miles a day up the middle of the Atlantic Ocean this time, guided by her sense of magnetic north, back to the northern feeding area, back to her noisy colony of thousands, and her birthplace of Greenland in just 6 weeks' time. The little seabird's 60,000-mile journey across the earth is complete. She will make it every year of her life, chasing sun and food for 30 years, traveling enough miles in her lifetime to fly to the moon and back 3 times. Resting, slowly unruffling her well-traveled wings, the little Arctic tern takes in a sun. Kip, 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 she calls, waits for the journey to begin again. 30,000 miles to go in just 3 months. The end. And then in the back, if you look at a copy up close, you can read all about the life cycle and the biology of Arctic terns. And then I talk a lot about the food that they eat to keep their bodies full of energy for that long journey. So that is the end of the story. And now I wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about my process. So this all started for me when I read an article, I think it was in the National Geographic. It was a team of scientists had tracked Arctic terns for the first time, and they already knew that Arctic terns traveled from pole to pole, which is really exceptional. They just didn't know the mileage, and what they found was that these birds travel like way more than they thought, and it was the longest recorded migration ever. So I just thought that was really fascinating, and I wanted to know more. And I started to, it started out as a poster. I started illustrating a poster of like a map of this Arctic tern's journey. And I realized the more that I learned about these birds, the more this could be a story, and a story for children. So yeah, so I decided to write a manuscript. So here is an original manuscript. It was like an earlier draft. And you can see all my notes here. This was, I sent this to my editor, and then we had a conversation about how I needed to really beef up the story because it was quite spare originally. And so to beef it up, I really started researching. So I looked at scientific papers and actually plotted out, there's dates throughout the story. You can see specific dates when specific birds had landed at different parts of the world. And so I ended up using that to sort of be the skeleton for the story to help me know, where exactly would these birds be. And this one, even though this one, she travels along the coast of Africa, they also travel down North America and South America. And then there's also some over in the Pacific. So after I had all the details, and I'd really bulked up that story and made it way more interesting, I started sketching out the book. And so here's what a lot of illustrators use. I don't know if you could see these. These are it's a sheet of little thumbnails of this is a 32-page book. And originally, it's now a 40-page. The final book is a 40-page book, but this was 32 pages where you can see I'm trying to figure out what are all the scenes that are going to go with the text that I'd written. So that's part of the process. And then from there, I did tighter sketches on tracing paper. I use tracing paper all the time. So I trace a lot, and I like to tell kids that it's really great to trace things as an artist. So you can see these are tighter sketches. And then these were blown up larger and became kind of what I used to reference the paintings. So then when I jumped into doing the actual paintings, one thing I wanted to mention, so I mentioned before that I had been to Maine and I went to Metinick Island. So my husband was with me, and he is a hobbyist photographer, and he took a ton of shots of Arctic terns. And so I used a lot of these to be the final art. So here's like a shot that he took, and you probably can't see this, but I literally traced these silhouettes because I really wanted to get all these really beautiful silhouettes. These birds are just so beautiful, the forms that they make. So I used these by tracing them. And then on the cover, you can see, here's one of the shots that my husband did that I used. So this is the little bird that's up there. And then here was the reference for the main bird, the picture that he took. And you can see that this is an adult that has the full black cap, but the juvenile, so the 1 or 2 year old is going to have just the smaller black cap and a lot more white. And also the juvenile has a black bill, and the adults have a bright red orange bill. So yeah, so I used the photography throughout the book. So really that experience on the island was so important. And most of the birds in this book that are painted are from those birds that were on the island. So my process when I started to paint, I don't have a piece of the wood here, but I paint on wood. So I paint on oak plywood, and it's cut basically to a size of one of these spreads. So it's roughly 8 by 16. So it's roughly this full size. And so I'll paint it, and then I scan it in and do final retouching in Photoshop. And then I will layer over pencil layers. So with this book, I really wanted it to feel like a travel journal. So there's a lot of little pencil birds throughout, little pencil details. So I do that again on tracing paper, and then I scan that in to Photoshop. And then for the maps, I had a lot of pencil tracings of maps. So here was a map of Africa that made its way into the book. So yeah, that's pretty much my art process and my process of writing and making this book. And I think for me, I think what really drew me to these animals is I feel like they're not really very well known, Arctic terns. And I wanted to shine a light on just how remarkable these little animals are. So yeah, that was my hope in creating The Longest Journey. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed hearing about it and hearing the story. So do any of you have any questions for me to answer at this point?
Yeah, that was fabulous. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, and I didn't.
Oh, my name's Amy Hevron.
Amy, okay, Amy, yeah, That was great, Amy. The whole presentation and the story. It's like, wow, this is story time. I'm for an adult. What a great thing to do on a hot afternoon.
Yeah, in air conditioning.
Yeah. So your process. So I got a little lost on the Photoshop.
Oh,
Did you do watercolors? You know, first and then.
so I paint, so it's actually acrylic paint on wood. So it's on oak plywood. So this one you can kind of see it a little bit.
Yeah.
So most of it is painted. And then basically just for the bookmaking process, it's easier for it to be digital art for me to send off to the publisher. And I have a background in design, so I know how to use Photoshop. So basically I put everything in there and color correct it the way I want it. And then I layer over all those pencil pieces in Photoshop as well. Painting on the wood, like to get this pencil, that wood grain really fights you. So it's hard to do fine pencil detail on the wood grain. But with Photoshop, it's cleaner, you know, obviously. So I can scan it in and place it over. And then it's a final high-res digital art piece that I'm able to send off to the publisher rather than like a huge stack of like heavy wood pieces of art that I would have to ship to them in New York. So yeah.
And why do you paint on oak plywood? Well,
You know, it started a long time ago for me, painting on wood. I started doing these little art shows where I painted on like smaller pieces of wood, like wood blocks. And I was doing florals and little scenes and stuff. And then I started experimenting with different types of wood. And I just really liked the texture of painting with the acrylic on the wood. And then having the wood grain show through, I just thought it's fun for me. I like the texture of it.
And how long did it take you from start to finish, to put this all together?
Ooh, this was a long journey. It really was. I feel like this was probably a 5-year process, which has been longer for me. But typically with picture books, like the final art for this book was due last spring. So usually it's due like at least a year before the book comes out. So yeah, so I was finishing up art, you know, this time last year. And then, but the writing process was the longest process for me. Just the research and getting the story right. That was probably a couple years, 3 years, something like that.
And are you working on other projects at the same time?
Yeah. So at the time that I was doing this, I was also illustrating for a couple other picture books for other authors. So that I like to kind of juggle things. So that was fun. It's pretty common for me to be working on about 3 picture books at the same time, doing different roles. Like sometimes I'm just the illustrator and sometimes I'm writing and illustrating. And sometimes I'm researching for a story. So yeah. But I really love this one because it's nonfiction and I've done a lot of fiction up to this point. But I think as a kid, I would have really gravitated towards nonfiction books and this kind of, that, showcases art. So yeah.
And how long did you spend on, is it Matinic?
Yeah, Matinic.
Matinic Island. How long were you there? Was it just
Yep.
Oh, can you hear us?
Yeah, it was cutting out a little bit, but yeah, I was on the island just for maybe 4 or 5 hours. It wasn't very long. And we got to, the birds nest on the ground and it was early June. So there were still eggs. There weren't chicks yet. But all the parents were very protective. So we had to stay in the wood bird blinds. So there are these small wood structures that are a little bit raised off the ground and they have openings. So you can watch and take pictures and videos. And so I did a lot of that and I just loved it. I'm a birder, so I just loved hanging out with them and being with and hearing that they're kind of have obnoxious voices. That was so fun because they're so graceful and beautiful, and yet their voices they don't match. So
we heard a little bit about that last week here.
Oh, okay.
Biologists were talking about their work on Matinic just last week here. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It zoomed live, from the island. So So that's why I thought this would be a great, sequel to that, that showing, that
Yeah.
but I agree with you. I love terns. I love watching terns. They're so graceful in the sky. And,
Yeah.
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 Did biologists explain the aerodynamics of the bird? I
Mhm.
saw a couple things. Maybe I didn't see this. I saw a forked. I don't have the bird book in front of me.
Right.
The forked tail, and do some not have a forked tail? I thought I saw a couple of different versions of the.
You mean
Does that play into the aerodynamics?
Yeah, it does for the bird. Yeah, it does for the birds. And I do have, I have some of that. Sometimes, their tail goes really fine point as well.
Okay.
And sometimes it curls a little bit.
Okay.
So what they can do with their wings is really incredible. How they can maneuver.
So that must help them with their longest journey. I mean, the way they're.
Yeah. There's one thing that I didn't mention, but the book really needed to be accurate because it's nonfiction, it's for kids. And so Linda Welch, who's based out of Rockland, that is an expert on these, she reviewed everything, and there were some little, revisions here or there to keep it consistent. And there was one little line that I had in there about her sleeping in flight. But I removed it because we don't have that scientific data yet. We don't know if terns do that. They might, because other long migrators do, like the albatross. They've actually tracked albatrosses sleeping, like with EKG machines attached to them, but they haven't been able to do it on these little Arctic terns. So we don't know that yet, but most likely they do. I just had to remove it because we don't know for sure.
I apologize. I came in halfway through the presentation. Looking at the book here, which is fantastic. And I noticed, you might have already spoken to this, but I noticed there are some dates along the journey. Are those related to a specific bird or a common time? Where did the dates come from?
So the dates came from a research paper that I looked at that's referenced on the very last page. I kind of spell out what that research paper was, but it was a team that was tracking birds from Greenland. And so they had specific dates that they knew they made it to like the North Atlantic Ocean, where they were feeding for several months. Like they had dates in their research papers. So I pulled those out to give us a sense of time. And also then I layered on the solstice, which I thought was really interesting because that's so important for these birds, like the position of the sun, the time of year, the seasons, for them to know when to migrate. I thought the dates and the specific locations were really interesting. So
I think it adds a lot. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What made you decide to do a different, I forget what you called it, but when you take the dust jacket off and it's different inside?
Well, this one's kind of, I don't always do that, but actually my editor really liked, I had two different cover options, and one was this and one was the other one. And he's like, why don't you just do the other one on the case wrap? So that's what we did. And it was fun because I really enjoy illustrating maps. So it was fun to get to do a couple different versions of it.
Yeah, most books are just most children's books are just the same
right
on both. And so I actually opened it earlier just to see if maybe we could keep the dust jacket off so we wouldn't mess it up handling.
Right.
But it was so cool that it was different underneath. I was blown away.
Yeah.
That's great. I've never seen that either.
So do you have any other nonfiction books in the works since you've kind of started dabbling in this area?
Yeah, I have the one that I was working on kind of overlapping with this when I was illustrating for, her name is Melissa Stewart is the author, and she has written hundreds of nonfiction books, and it is called Tree Hole Homes. So it's about different animals that live in different tree holes. So that comes out in September. And then for moving into this next year, what I'm working on is a book about leafcutter ants, which I find really fascinating. So really, I think these stories are just animals and critters that I'm fascinated by and I want to learn more about. And I think I could pull off some interesting art with it. So yeah, leafcutter, there's a leafcutter story. And then I'm also working on a series of tiny habitats books. So the first one is going to be about a nurse log. So a nurse log, I don't know if y'all know, but that is like in an old growth forest or in a forest, when an old tree falls over and is left there, then all of the life that grows from that. So, you know, it starts with fungus and ferns and beetles. And so all the little life that, you know, is supported by a nurse log. And I live in Washington State, and so I love looking, like our forests here have a lot of them. And so I've taken lots of pictures, and I know that they help with biodiversity for forests. So yeah, so it's a story about nurse logs. So those are the two hot things for me.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
I noticed the illustrations of the juveniles have black feet as well, if that's accurate.
Yes, that black beak. Did you say black beak, black bill? Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus the orange one of the adults.
So the black bill and the black legs as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's great having a kid's book with so much scientific accuracy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was really important for the editor that I was working with, and also just for me, that, you know, it's educational and it's not fictionalizing it, you know. So yeah.
It still flows really nice. Like it's still just a great story. Like it's in that middle ground where certain kids wouldn't necessarily realize that it's not just something that you created. As they grew older and like kept reading it, they might think about it more and like become invested like you were and get interested in them. So it's such a cool way
Yeah.
to present.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, you see a lot of books about polar bears and tigers and, you know, other animals. And I think, yeah, I really love birds, and Arctic terns are just exceptional. So to be able to highlight them to kids, and also just, you know, I think the animals that are living on the poles are, you know, it's tough survival right now for them. So highlighting them, you know, my hope is that kids will want to learn more and want to, you know, and I think what y'all do there at the visitor center with your little play area, that's, you know, to teach them to be little scientists. Like I love all that. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you have like I looked at your Instagram a little bit. Are you active there? Like, where's a good place for people to keep up with you and hear about as you do more?
Probably Instagram. I feel like that's where I'm most active. Yeah. I'm not super active there, but that, you know, when there's events and things, that's usually where I'll put it. So yeah.
Just your name.
Well, it's yeah. It's Amy Hevron. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get ready to fly back and get ready for migration. It's just about time to take off.
It is. So are there birds in the colony right now?
Yes.
Y'all know? Okay.
Yeah, they so like we were saying, they talked to us last Saturday from Matinic, and they have had a couple of the Arctic terns, specifically from one of the productivity plots that they use. They did have them fledged, so you know they're still around the island, they're learning to fish and everything, but they're up in the air and you know getting right after it. So they're just about ready to get going.
That's awesome. And I feel like with Linda's research, those birds follow the North America, South America coasts. I don't know if y'all.
Yes, I think so. I think when they
Yeah.
GPS satellite tags, they went down through Puerto Rico and then on down South America. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So fascinating.
It is. It's fun to see as they learn more and get the technology more so they can do the tags. We're going to learn more about them.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks for listening and hearing my story. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you
you.
for chatting.
Well, we'll see you again.
Okay.
Yes.